Erev Shabbat Shalom Rabotai. We're continuing with our Mishna Yomi Mesechet Peah. We're up to Perek Bet Mishnah Vav. Yesterday we spoke about how do you decide if a field is going to be considered one field or two. Now we said yesterday if somebody plants his field with one species of produce, so even if you gather it as two separate crops, it's considered one field. You leave one peah because it's only one species. If you planted two different species, so even if you harvested, you gathered it all as one crop, you have to leave two separate corners, two separate peot, because it's two different species, making it two different fields. However, the Mishnah said, let's say I plant one species, but a variety. For example, I plant wheat, white wheat, and brown wheat. Same species, different variety. The Mishnah previously yesterday said, if you harvest, if you gather all the produce at one shot, you're going to leave one quarter. It's going to be considered one field. If, however, you harvest them separately, you gather them separately, then it's going to be considered two fields, even though it's the same species. The Mishnah today is going to give the source for this halakha. How do you know that if it's the same species but a variety, it depends on how you harvest it, if all in one shot or one and then the other one later. It happened once that Rabbi Shimon of Mitzpah planted two varieties of wheat on land, brown wheat and white wheat, and he brought the question of how many peot to give before Rabban Gamliel. Now the Tosfot Yom Tov says that Rabban Gamliel did not know the answer. So they went up to the chamber in the Temple Mount, Lishkat Gazit, the Hugh Stone they call it, and asked what the halakha was. Now, this is where the great Sanhedrin, the rabbinical court, stood. That's where they were. So they went up to the court to ask this question. Amar Nachum Lavlar. So Nachum, the scribe, Lavlar is a scribe. Nachum, they used to call him by his profession. Nachum Lavlar said, Mikubal ani me Rabbi Measha. I received the tradition from Rabbi Measha, Shekibel me'abad, that he received from his father, Shekibel min azugot. His father received it from the two pairs of leaders of the Jewish nation that the Mishnah and Avot speaks about. If you look in the first parak of Avot, it lists the unbroken transmission of the oral Torah from Moshe to Yoshua to the Skinim, the elders to the prophets, to the men of great assembly, to the successive pairs of sages, which is, we said, one was the president and one was the Ab Beit Din who presided over the great Sanhedrin. So, Nachuma Lavlar says that I received from Ramishai, received from his father, received from these two leaders, these sages, Shekibnu min ad-Nevi'im, that they received from the prophets, Halakha la-Moshe mi-Sinai, that they received the law from Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai, but it was not written, it was oral. That if you plant two varieties of wheat, of one species, white wheat and brown wheat, if you harvest them as a single crop, you give one corner. If you harvest them as two crops, you give two corners. The Mishnah is telling us that this is a halakha le-Moshe mi-Sinai. This is what Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai. There's no written source to it. It's an oral tradition that we have. That is the end of Mishnah Vav. Mishnah Zayin Rabotai, very interesting. The Torah says, Uvkutzrechem et ketzir artzechem. When you harvest, the harvest of your land. The Torah seems like it's telling us the peah obligation only applies when you harvest your land. So the Mishnah is going to deal with now crops that I did not harvest, that they are exempt from peah. A field of crops that non-Jews harvested for themselves, or that robbers harvested. The Rav writes that these non-Jews were not your employees. If they were your employees, it'd be considered like you did it yourself. Rather, these non-Jews came and harvested it without telling you. Or robbers harvested them. Or ants chewed, which the Rav explains that the ants chewed the stalks from the bottom, detaching it from the ground. That's called harvesting it. Or that the wind or the animals broke down. Pitura. It is exempt from the peah obligation because in all these cases, the crop was cut down in a way that's not my harvest. I did not cut it down. So the Mefarshim write, even if the robbers or any other, the non-Jews, abandoned the produce after cutting it down, they harvested the field, but they left the produce, you do not have to give peah. You do not have to leave any corner. Why? Because the Torah says that you have to harvest it. We follow the words of the Torah, the way the Chachamim learn it. Since I did not harvest it, I have no peah obligation. Now, the Mishnah continues, Katzar chetzia v'katzru listim chetzia. If the owner harvested the first half, and then the robbers came and harvested the second half, or any of the other examples robbers were using, but it can be the ants, or the wind, or the non-Jews. Pitura, the Mishnah says exempt. You do not have to give peah on anything. Why? Shechovat peah bakama. The obligation of peah for the first half of the field only comes in when the second half is harvested. Meaning, I harvest the first half of the field, correct? The obligation of peah is still lingering over the standing crop, which has now been cut down in a way that's not peah. So since the obligation of peah was resting over the second half of the field, and that second half of the field was cut by a way that I'm not required to give peah, the obligation never takes effect, and therefore there's no requirement to give peah even on the first half, which was harvested properly. Because the mitzvah, the Mefarshim explained, the Rav writes, the mitzvah of peah is not to finish harvesting the field to the end, but it's to leave some standing crop as peah. We learned previously that if you harvest it to the end, you did the wrong thing. But now the Torah allows you a remedy by giving it to the poor person or to the ger. However, the way the Torah says it is that you have to leave some standing crop at the end. You should not harvest the whole thing. Here, I did leave some standing crop. I harvested one side of the field, and the other half I left a standing crop. However, beyond my control, non-Jews, robbers, wind, ants came, and they chopped down the other half. They harvested the other half. Therefore, there's no peah to be given. So I don't have to give anything, even for the first half. Why? Because when we said if you harvest the whole field, you have a remedy by giving, even though you harvested it, that's when I had an obligation of peah, but I violated it. Here, I did my obligation of peah. I left a standing crop. However, it was harvested. I had nothing to do with it. Therefore, I don't have to give peah even on the first half that I harvested properly. That is the end of today's Mishnah Yomi, Rabotai. Everyone should have a Erev Shabbat Shalom. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.